Welcome back to Labour for Learning CSEC Poetry Analysis. If you are new here, a very special welcome to you. Please don't forget to like my video and click the bell below to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any new video releases. Today we will be analysing another poem from the CSEC 2018 to 2023 collection, which is William Wordsworth, Composed Upon Westminster Bridge. Before we begin, let's look at Wordsworth's life and what might have influenced his decision to write this poem. Wordsworth's poem is a stately sonnet which renders the crowded sprawl of the metropolis as a romantic idyll. The poem was composed early in the Industrial Revolution. William Wordsworth is one of the most famous poets in the history of English literature. He was a popular writer in the collection of poetry known as the Romantics. The Romantics wrote about how nature can inspire us spiritually. Romantic poets wrote about their desire for freedom, and they disagreed with the way the poor were treated in society. The poem is set in London as seen from Westminster Bridge, connecting the south bank of the River Thames with Westminster on the north bank. Westminster, called an inner borough, is now part of London. Wordsworth's inspiration for writing the poem stems from a view he beheld from the bridge in London on the morning of July 31, 1802, and although he didn't write the poem until September the same year. The people of the city were still in bed, and the factories had not yet polluted the air with smoke. He and his sister Dorothy were crossing the bridge in a coach, taking them to a boat for a trip across the English Channel to France. In her diary, Dorothy wrote, "We mounted the Dover coach at Charing Cross. It was a beautiful morning. The city, St. Paul's with the river and a multitude of little boats made a most beautiful sight. The houses were not overhung with their cloud of smoke, and they were spread out endlessly. Yet the sun shone so brightly with such pure light that there was even something like a purity of nature's own grand spectacles." Sonnet Composed Upon Westminster Bridge is a poem which both tells and shows. Let's now have a look at what the poem reveals. Composed Upon Westminster Bridge by William Wordsworth. Earth hath not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth, like a garment, wear the beauty of the morning, silent, bare, ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendour valley, rock, or hill. Ne'er saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. Critics surmise that this image was Wordsworth's view from the bridge. You should notice that the sky is clear as the wheels of industrialization were asleep at the time, and so smog had not yet settled over the city at that time first thing in the morning. Let's take a closer look at the poem. The first line of the poem begins, "Earth hath not anything to show more fair." The first line is a hyperbole, as he says this is the fairest sight in the world. Now, this is a very confident statement by Wordsworth because other Londoners and other visitors to the capital at the time would not have thought London to be fair due to the amount of smog that hung over the city due to the smoke that the factories emitted in the air. He ends the first line with a colon, which indicates that he is about to create a list of what makes the site fair and lovely, so he has to justify clearly what makes the city seem so lovely from Westminster Bridge. He continues in line 2, "Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty." Now, the soul that he's talking about here is a challenge to anyone who contradicts his opinion of the city so early in the morning. And so, soul here is speaking to that individual who would. Fair and dull creates a contrast between the earth's beauty and a soul's dullness, almost justifying that if you do not see the beauty that he is referencing here, your soul will be dull and dim, lifeless even. He continues in line 3, "A sight so touching in its majesty," and majesty refers not only to the description that he is positing here, but also literally to Westminster Abbey, where the kings or queens of England are coronated. Because he can, from his position on the bridge, he could see the different buildings and he knew what each was. And so he could talk about the stateliness of the building as well as the view that he was writing about here. He continues in lines 4 to 5. The city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning silent bear. So the fact that he talks about the city wearing a garment, he uses personification, creating the idea that the city was like a person wearing clothes, which creates a sense of the city as a living creature, consciously clothing itself in nature, becoming part of it. However, we have a contradiction because he says the city wears a garment, but then the beauty of the morning is silent and bare. And what he does here is actually give you some insight into what he's seeing, because literally there's no one about. It's very quiet. Boats were not up the River Thames at the time, and so it's silent and it's bare. He continues listing ships, towers, domes, theatres and temples lie open onto the fields and to the sky. And here we have a just juxtaposition or contrast between list of buildings that make up the city opposed to the focus on nature again. In line 8 of this stanza, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air, the city bright and glittering convey how clear the morning is, hinting at what it is like before the wheels of industrialization, as mentioned before, begins to turn. In this stanza, at the end, Wordsworth creates a balance between the city and nature, suggesting to us that both exist together. In the second and last stanza, he talks about never did sun more beautifully steep in its first splendor, valley, rock, or hill. And within these two lines, lines 9 to 10, the sun is personified and referred to as a man who rises sharply and beautifully, emphasizing the beauty of the city in the morning. This use of personification also helps the reader to personalize the beauty described, so he's making it more relatable to the reader. He continues in line 11, never saw I, never felt a calm so deep. And so he is giving you now an insight about how he felt upon looking on this scenery. So the first person perspective of never saw I, never felt a calm so deep, breaks from the descriptive paragraphs previously seen and reflects on the effect the sight has had on Wordsworth himself. He continues, the river glided hath its own sweet will. The river here too is also personified, allowing the reader to perceive the river as real instead of a thing that's used for industrialists in terms of shipping their goods to and fro. Then he says, dear God, he exclaims here, in disbelief even. The very houses seem asleep. So he could not believe that a city that was vibrant and pumping 24 hours a day, even sometimes, that all of this felt so different and so natural and pure that even the houses seem asleep. And so he personifies the houses here again, placing emphasis on the peace that exists over the city at the time of day. Not one person in these houses seemed to be awake. And then he ends, and all that mighty heart is lying still. And mighty heart suggests that the city of London is the heart of what makes England pump at the time. And so the heart of the city, being London, is lying still in disbelief for Wordsworth. In summary, and in terms of the meaning of the poem, the speaker in the poem Composed Upon Westminster Bridge declares that he has found the most beautiful scene on earth. You'd have to be someone with no spiritual sense, no taste or beauty to pass over the bridge that morning without stopping to marvel at the sights. London is wearing the morning's beauty like a fine shirt or cape. London looked really good to him at that time of the morning. It's early morning, so early that all is quiet. There happens to be no fog to obscure the view because the business hadn't started. The view is so clear that Wordsworth could see various landmarks visible from the bridge. No doubt he could see landmarks such as St. Paul's Cathedral and the Tower of London that stood before him in all their grandeur in the morning light. The persona compares the sunlight on the buildings to the light that shines on the countryside, and he seems totally astonished to feel more at peace in the bustling city than he has anywhere else. And below him, the River Thames moved slowly, and in a burst of emotion at the end, he pictures the city as blissfully asleep before another busy day. Now, in terms of method, Wordsworth uses hyperbole to exaggerate what he sees. In earth hath not anything to show more fair. He also personified the city, describing it as wearing clothes and addressing the sun as you would a person. In this city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning. He personifies the houses and addressing them as people still asleep in the quiet of the morning. In dear God, the very houses seem asleep. He uses mainly sight imagery to show the reader what he sees. However, he also captures some sound imagery with his description of what he hears. So the beauty of the morning, he sees ships, towers, domes, and of course he hears silence. He includes a metaphor, and all that mighty heart is lying still, in the last line suggesting that the city is the heart of the nation, alive but at this time is inactive and dominated by nature. Let's now look at the form, rhyme, and meter of the poem. One way of understanding the form of the poem you are presented with is to count the number of lines in the poem, noting where there are rhyme schemes, etc. You will note that this poem consists of 14 lines, and there are lines that rhyme. For example, Composed Upon Westminster Bridge is a lyric poem in the form of a sonnet. Now, in English, there are two types of sonnets: Shakespearean sonnets and the Petrarchan sonnets. Both sonnets have 14 lines. A Petrarchan sonnet consists of an 8-line stanza or octave and a 6-line stanza known as sestet. Wordsworth's poem is a Petrarchan sonnet developed by the Italian poet Petrarch between 1304 to 1374. Petrarch was a Roman Catholic priest. The first stanza presents a theme or problem, and the second stanza develops a theme or suggests a solution to the problem. Arguably, the view of the city described in the octave isn't a problem, and the sestet doesn't go about solving it. But if we apply the definition of the Italian sonnet more loosely, the poem does follow its form. The octave presents an image of the city, and the sestet describes the emotional effect of that view on the speaker. In terms of rhymes, in Wordsworth's poem, the first 8 lines, known as the octave, present a view of the city as it wears the sunlight morning like a garment, and its edifices glitter beneath the sky. These first 8 lines rhyme, and as said before, are known as an octave. On looking at the poem, you should note that line 1 with the word ending fair, line 4, where, 5, bear, and line 8, air, all rhyme, creating that naturalistic opinion of the scene that Wordsworth was actually viewing at that time. The last 6 lines then boldly declare that this is man-made formation. It's just as beautiful in the sunlight as any natural formation, such as valley or a hill. Moreover, it is as calming to the observer, for even the houses seem to sleep like the people in them. These 6 lines rhyme alternately. This is the sestet of the poem. Moving on to the meter. Now, the meter of the poem is iambic pentameter with 10 syllables per line in a 5 iambic feet per line. An iambic foot consists of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. The first 2 lines of the poem demonstrate the metric pattern. So, for example, starting with line 1, it's clear that the poem has broken with strict metrical convention, or an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So instead of starting the stressed syllable with has, what Wordsworth did here is to begin with earth being stressed. Since he's a nature lover, he wanted to put that forefront here. So the speaker begins the poem on an assertive note, and he says earth. That reflects the speaker's conviction in the city's fairness as the first word and stressed syllable. Earth is emphasized, signaling that the poem will deal just as much with nature as the city. So therefore, Wordsworth often uses the stresses of the lines to emphasize specific words and reflect the speaker's strong emotions. Now, with theme, nature is a dominant theme. London is not introduced in its negative aspect, typical of the smog and soot caused by factories during the industrial era. It is inserted in natural scenery, capturing a sense of normal before the city awakes. Wordsworth achieves a positive tone in doing this, an attitude, especially with words such as bright, glittering, splendor, and glideth, creating a magical vision of the city in the early morning light. This was not uncommon of Wordsworth since he's a nature lover, and if you think of what the city was like during that industrial era where smog covered it, and the fact that only early as this in the morning that you can get a glimpse of the city, then being a nature lover, you can understand that Wordsworth would have been totally gobsmacked by what he has seen. On to big ideas. Remember, big ideas are not explicitly stated in the poem, but these are ideas that you would have inferred having read the poem. So Wordsworth conveys the idea that nowhere on earth is more beautiful than the view from Westminster Bridge. He suggests that when the city is asleep, its true beauty is magnificent. He seems awestruck that the city appears at one with nature at the first light of day, somewhat surprised that this would be the case. He creates the impression that the whole city is like a single, immensely powerful object that for the moment remains inactive at first light. In terms of comparison, if you've been following the videos, you will know that all these poems have something to do with nature, and so CSEC would no doubt compare Sonnet Composed Upon Westminster Bridge in the English paper 2, exam to God's Grandeur by Gerald Manley Hopkins, West Indies, USA by Stuart Brown, and of course An African Thunderstorm by David Rubadiri. We are at the end of another analysis of one of CSEC's poems from its CSEC 2018-2023 collection. Today we looked at an analysis of Sonnet Composed Upon Westminster Bridge. Hopefully you found it useful. To continue to receive analysis of other poems, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe by hitting the bell below. See you soon!